Welcome, Gunrunner.
Hello everybody, Kieran aka The Laird here, and I've got a really good hardware review for you this week, as you can already see. First of all, I want to apologise for my rather croaky voice because I'm currently recovering from a really nasty bout of flu where I completely lost my voice, and subsequently I found my videos really hard to make this week, and I've done them very late in the week, trying to give my voice a chance to recover. It's not too bad now, as you can probably hear, but not great. But there we go, I digress. So yeah, this week we are going to be looking at the Atari ST. That very yellowed old ST right there, which is my original ST from when I was a kid. I'll go into that in a moment, actually, to give you my story of that. But I just wanted to address something else first, because I'm sure that those of you who have been following me for a long time will probably find it quite bizarre that I've never done a proper video on the Atari ST before, a hardware review. And the reason for that is just that I never got around to it. It was always an intended one that I wanted to do, but as I picked up different bits and pieces to my collection over the years, it kind of was always the latest thing I'd picked up would be, my next review, rather than what I already had in my collection for a long time, like this ST, which when I started collecting was one of the first things I had, because my mum had it, which I'll go into in a moment. So yeah, so that's why it's just a video that I never got around to doing. But here we are. So as I said, this is my original ST. So to give you a bit of background on my ST story, before anything else, my first computer was a Spectrum. I had a rubber key briefly for a little while that was faulty. I got it kind of working by buying a new membrane and stuff for it. But not long after, got a Plus 2 for Christmas, a Plus 2A in fact, which I shared with my sister, my older sister and my younger brother. It was a computer between the three of us, and for its first part of its life, it was actually downstairs so all of us could use it, but before long it was in my room. So and I did share a room with my younger brother, so it wasn't just me. He got access to it as well, but my sister wasn't so interested in it. She'd come in and play on it now and again, but she wasn't as interested in computing as we were. And it was me who picked the Plus 2 in the first place anyway. That's what I said we should get. But anyway, I digress once again. So that was my first computer, and then a lot of my friends who had Spectrums, which is one reason why I got Spectrum, because everyone who knew had a Spectrum pretty much, were getting 16-bit computers. My one Commodore 64 friend got an Amiga. I had a friend who had a Commodore 16, believe it or not. He upgraded to an Amiga. I had a friend who had an Atari 7800. He got an ST. I had a friend another friend actually had a 7800. He got an ST. My next door neighbour who had a BBC, he got an ST. So loads of people I knew had either got an ST or Amiga. Mostly STs. The STs, more people have got STs than Amigas. I was getting quite jealous of that because I wanted to get in on the 16-bit thing. So what I did was I started saving for a long time, and eventually I sort of got up enough money to get somewhere. My local computer shop called Software Seller used to sell second-hand stuff, and he had this ST in the shop, and it was a little bit cheaper than usual. It was second-hand, but it was also a bit cheaper than usual, which I'll go into in a moment. He let me part exchange the Spectrum, which took a while because I had to persuade my sister, who was being a bit cantankerous about it, that it was a wise thing to do, because it was partly hers, and my sister was always cantankerous anyway. Even though she barely used the computer, she still was a bit funny about it. In the end, my dad said it was okay to do it, so I did it. yeah, to get the ST. The ST, I can still remember exactly, it was £165. I can still remember that. And I say I part exchanged a Spectrum, a load of Spectrum games that I had, some fairly decent box stuff. Some of the more recent games I bought, like I remember Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles: The Coin Op, which I think was the very last Spectrum game I bought. I think was one of them. I was quite late coming to the ST, so I think that was 1991, if I remember rightly. But yeah, I got one in the end. I got there in the end, and this ST served me really well because it got me through college as well because it had the PC compatibility. In the fact that you could use disk on the PC and use it on the ST. So I could do stuff on First Word on the ST, and I could load it into Microsoft Word on the computers in my college, which was great. Really, really useful that I could do that. We'll have a look around the ST in a moment, and that will lead one of the reasons why I got it a bit cheaper than other ones that he had at the time. There was a couple of issues with it, which he did actually fix for me. He was great, really good. But yeah, that's my ST story. That's how I ended up with an ST, and yeah, I used it for everything. It wasn't just a games computer to me. I liked playing around with STOS on it, First Basic. I did used to like making music in quartet. That was good fun. I used to like buying demos. I got quite into the public domain demo scene. I used to buy quite a few public domain games as well. A lot of this stuff actually used to come off cover discs as well, ST format in particular. And obviously, I did buy a lot of games for it and copied a lot of games as well off my friends. But again, I prefer to have the original games, so I probably had more original games than I did have pirated games. Which a lot of people found strange about them, but I always preferred having the real games in the boxes and stuff. And I still got all those original games. And as I say, this is my original ST, and the reason how I still have it now, even though I went off and lived abroad and everything, I thought it was long gone. But my mum was in contact with my dad, who actually I don't speak to my dad. I haven't spoken to him since I was 21. My dad found some stuff in his loft, which he then gave to my mum because my mum was talking to him at the time. So my mum ended up with it in a box in her shed. She didn't know what was in it, and she said, "I've got 2 boxes of your stuff in my shed. Come and get them." This is just after I came back from abroad. And in one of the boxes was my ST and all the discs as well. 2 shoe boxes of discs. The mouse, everything. And my Atari 2600 was in that same box as well with some games. But there we go. That's my whole of my ST story. So I'll briefly give a bit of background on the ST for those who don't know. I don't want to go massively into the history because that would be a different video. This is really just a hardware review. But I think it's important for some context to add some history. So obviously the ST, first models of the ST, which didn't have the disk drive, they were kind of cut back to about here. Had external disk drives and even an operating system you had to load from disks on some of the early models. There was the 260 ST, which was called so because it was originally going to have 256k of memory, but they soon found out that that was not enough, so they all shipped with the 512. And I have already looked at that model of the ST on my channel, so rather than go into that in great detail, I'll link that in the comments. But as I say, it was released in 1985. It was the first developed product, I suppose, by Atari Corporation, Jack Trammell's new company. And it was he got it out before the Amiga, so it was out of the two, it was the first one to hit the market, which was surprising because obviously the Amiga had been in development for years. The Amiga was originally going to be an Atari computer. It was Atari who put a lot of the money into developing it. And of course the turmoil at Atari, the deal was cancelled. Commodore picked up the Amiga. Jack Tramiel bought Atari, started development of a 16-bit computer there called, originally codenamed RBP, Rock Bottom Price. Brought in a team of engineers from Commodore that he'd worked with to do it. So really, the ST is the successor to the 64, the Commodore 64, and the Amiga is the successor to the Atari 8-bit, because the Atari 8-bit had the same designers as the Amiga. Many of them, anyway. Jay Miner's team. So yeah, the ST, the main designer was Shiraz Shivji, and they developed the computer from start to finish in less than 6 months, which is absolutely unbelievable that they developed a computer in such a short time. And an interesting fact about that is that when they were developing it, the ST was originally going to have Windows on it, but Windows wasn't ready in time, so it shipped with a different operating system instead. It shipped with Gem, which is now, of course, quite famous for that green desktop that the ST has. That was Gem, one of the first GUIs, one of the first Windows-based operating systems. But yeah, it would have been interesting, wouldn't it, if the ST had shipped with Windows, whether something different would have happened, because obviously Windows became the dominant thing for PCs. I mean, would the PC still have got Windows, or would it just be an ST thing? Who knows? It's certainly an interesting theory to think about, isn't it? But yeah, they got it onto the market, and it led the early years of the 16-bit computer war, because the ST was a lot cheaper than the Amiga. The Amiga 500 came later. A lot of people forget about that. Originally, it was the Amiga 1000, which was obviously more like a PC with a pizza box design. They were very, very expensive. STs were a lot cheaper, so the ST sold in much higher numbers to begin with, and that's why a lot of early 16-bit games were developed on the ST first, then ported to the Amiga. Once stuff like Shadow the Beast came along, around 1990 time, especially, it started to turn the other way. The Amiga became cheaper. The high cost of RAM had cost the ST quite dearly. Actually, there was a big thing about issue with RAM. I think Atari ended up getting fined, if I remember rightly, as well. It's a story worth looking into if you're interested. I don't want to go into it here because it'll waste too much time. But yeah, so the prices became quite comparable, about £100 in it, sometimes less. So the Amiga 500 started selling great numbers and took over the market from the ST. But that said, if you actually look at a lot of sales figures, though definitive sales figures for the ST and Amiga are very hard to find. They vary greatly according to where you look, but the actual final sales figures for the ST and Amiga aren't that far apart from when you look at them. Various things I've looked at, but I saw one thing that estimated that total ST sales were around 7 million and total Amiga sales were around 9 million. So it's the ST was a big success. It sold very well for Atari and made them a lot of money, and really brought the company back. I mean, say Atari were nothing when Jack Tramiel took over. He was borrowing money left, right, and centre. By the time the ST got going, they were back on the stock market. They had investors. They were doing really, really well, and it allowed them to invest in other products. And obviously, stuff came along later, like the Lynx, especially, but obviously new models of the ST as well, like the Mega ST, TT, later on the Falcon, which I've also looked at on this channel. So I'll link my review of the Falcon. I've done it back to front, really, shouldn't I? This should have been done before the Falcon, but it's just how it turned out. But I'll link my review of the Falcon in the comments for those interested in learning more about that. So yeah, this is the one that should have been in the middle of my 260 ST and Falcon review, really. But yeah, my timeline's a bit off now, isn't it? But there we go. So let's have a look at the computer itself. That would be wise to go to now. What I will quickly show you is the good old ST rollable mouse. I always thought this like such a cool design, like a little space shuttle or something. Looks really cool. Absolutely crap mouse, terrible. Like one of the first things I did actually when I got my ST was buy a third-party mouse because these are so terrible. But there's no design, no quibbles about how cool they look. They really do look awesome, I think, with the Atari logo and everything. That's nicely yellowed as well, isn't it? It was like that when I got it. And all STs shipped with an original black Atari 2600 joysticks. They certainly got their mileage out of the old CX 40 joysticks, didn't they, at Atari? I also thought it was strange they didn't bundle the ST, at least later on. I mean, they weren't there at the beginning, with the greyish version that came with the XE game system of this joystick, because obviously that was the same colour as the ST, because they used the XE computers, the 8-bit ones, and the XE console were the same colour as the ST and had similar design styling. So it's a bit strange that they carried on shipping it with the black joysticks. But there we go. I always liked the Atari joysticks. I had no quibbles there. I carried on using the Atari joystick. I didn't buy a different joystick. I just had. I mean, I still had some for my 2600, so it was great. I just carried on using them. But plenty of other controllers were available because it used the Atari standard, so to speak. So pretty any Atari compatible joystick would have worked, like a cheater or a quick shot or whatever you want. So they lay it flat. The ST is a beautiful design. I maintain that it's one of the best looking computers ever made. I mean, the way the F keys are designed, slanted like that, absolutely iconic. Really great looking computer in my opinion. I actually think the smaller ones look even better, the 260s, but these still look pretty good. It's a big old thing, and it's very heavy, because one of the reasons why these ones are so much bigger is not just because it's got the floppy disk drive, is because there's a power supply in this side built in. It's internal, which we will go into in a moment more. So they're very heavy. So it's actually quite hard for me to move around with one hand. So here on the back we have modem, printer, hard disk, floppy disk, so you could connect up a second disk drive. Something I always wanted to do but never did. I never did get a second disk drive because they were just too expensive. Your standard RF television socket. And actually that's worth mentioning because this model is the STfm. After those original smaller STs with the external disk drives, the first models that had built-in disk drives were called the STf. F standing for floppy. They had a floppy disk drive. And then we had an STfm, which was obviously STF floppy and modulator for TV modulator. Because the original models did not have RF connections, so you had to connect them to a monitor. And either a monochrome, a high-res monochrome monitor, which is another advantage actually the ST had over the Amiga, was it had a flicker-free high-res display, which the Amiga did not have, which is one reason why the ST was more widely used for stuff like desktop publishing, a bit like the Mac, and the music software, of course, which I will mention in a bit more in a while. That was good, but you could get a colour monitor as well. There was other monitors that were compatible, but obviously most people probably would have gone for an Atari monitor for it to match. We've got, that's our monitor socket there. And I actually will mention quickly while I'm here about the monitor socket is, that's what I use now to connect my ST up, because I bought one of these from a company called Retro Computer Shack. They're really good. I've bought loads of cables from them, and as you'll see, that's a SCART cable with a monitor connection on one end, so you can connect it up to pretty much any modern TV via SCART, which gives it obviously a much better picture than using your rubbish RF connection. There's your power supply socket, which is just a standard kettle lead, which is great because obviously if you lose the cable or you want to buy an ST off eBay and it's got no power cable, the power cable's a piece of piss to get because you can literally just nick one off your kettle. Right, so this side is rather important, the side with the power supply on, because there we have a cartridge port, pretty useless cartridge port, I have to say. I'm trying to lean that on my leg a minute, because the cartridge port is really restricted, I believe, in its access. I think it can only access something like 16K, which means it was never really used for games or anything like that. The main thing it was used for was the music software like Cubase and Steinberg and Notator, all the music software, was they'd create dongles that you plugged into your cartridge slot. So you couldn't use it unless you had that plugged in, and that was to basically stop piracy. Really, because the music software was very expensive. Very, very good way to stop piracy, because you had to have that plugged in to the cartridge port. And of course, along the same lines, is right there next to it, we have our MIDI ports, which is possibly the most important feature of the ST, because without the ST, I don't think we would have seen a European dance music scene the way we did, because it was the first computer to have built-in MIDI ports. It made that whole world accessible to millions of people who could literally just sit at home and make their own music. Loads of famous people have credited the Atari ST as helping them realise their dreams. People like Alternate, Prodigy used them. Norman Cook, Fatboy Slim, is a really famous one because he said that he still uses STs. There's pictures of him with them. Aphex Twin is another one. He used an ST still on one of his most recent albums. I remember him telling us. Sister Bliss, I read an interview with her recently talking about the ST. So yeah, a lot of really famous people use the ST. Even Madonna used an ST on one of her albums, the one she did with William Orbit, I think. So yeah, the ST was hugely important. And the funny thing is, a lot of people criticise the sound chip in the ST, saying that it was, not good enough for what the computer was. And I'd agree, because the ST was originally going to have something called the Amy chip, but they couldn't get it to work properly, as the story goes, and they put in a standard old Yamaha YM chip, 3-channel, pretty similar to the one in, the ZX Spectrum, for example, and lots of other systems of that time, and the ZX Spectrum 128, the Amstrad CPC. There was lots of computers that had that similar sound chip. Though the STs were slightly different, but basically the same chip, which gave it inferior sound, especially compared to the Amiga. It should have had better sound. I always thought they should have put a pokey chip in there as well, maybe, just to give it a bit more bump, so it had 2 sound chips to play with. That was fixed for later models of the ST, like the STE, which I haven't talked about. I'll mention that in a little while, though, where they put an additional sound chip in, a DMA sound chip, alongside it, so they had and added an extra 2 channels and could do digitised sound and stuff much better. But one of the advantages of using that Yamaha sound chip was that they could put in the MIDI ports, because it already had the compatibility to do that. So although they put in that rubbish sound chip, which might seem like the worst idea ever, I don't think it's a rubbish sound chip. I say rubbish, that's what everyone says, but I actually quite liked the sound of that chip and never had a problem with it. I thought the ST had a lot of really good music. But there we go. But yeah, that was the advantage of that. It wasn't total bad thing. So this is why I got this ST really cheap. It's this absolute bodge job that someone did with a disk drive. And the reason for that being there is that my ST is a really, really early STfm. It has TOS 1.02 on it, which is one of the earliest versions of the operating system. Which a lot of people say stood for Trammel operating system. Apparently that's not true. Apparently it just stood for Terminal operating system. But there's lots of different theories on that. But that's what I was told. But yeah, so it would have had a single-sided disk drive originally, because those early STs did have single-sided drives. They were later replaced with double-sided drives, obviously much better. Whoever owned this ST before me obviously wanted to have a double-sided drive instead of a single-sided, and put one in himself, and made a right bloody bodge job of it. As you can see, it wasn't even properly in line. So, in fact, you see me pulling it down a bit there, because it's actually cut off slightly at the top. Actually, those marks you can see there is where I used to have a bit of duct tape along the bottom there, holding the drive down, so it wasn't so hard to put the discs in and out. But that's why I got this ST a bit cheaper. Worked perfectly. Obviously, it's a fairly new disk drive. At least it meant I had double-sided disk drive. And having an early version of TOS, all the games were compatible, because there were some odd games that wouldn't work with later versions of TOS. But I never had that problem. But yeah, that's why I got it cheaper. Yeah, really bad job. This is always one of the bugbears of the ST, was that these later models with the built-in disk drives, they put the joystick and mouse ports underneath, which is very, very awkward to get to. If you wanted to change them over, for example, if you wanted to swap your mouse for a joystick for 2-player games, because the mouse used a second port The joystick used the first port, although they named them 0 and 1. So what the answer was is you bought these extenders. That was my original one that I bought. It was one of the first things I bought because the guy in the shop, software seller, who actually used an ST, he ran his whole shop on an ST. His first thing he said to me was, "You want one of these?" And he had some in stock, and he literally threw one in for me. Because what would happen was, if you didn't get one of these extenders, where you were constantly changing them over, these would become loose and come away from the board, and then you'd have to have them resoldered, which was a right bugger. So, or I had a friend who actually had really loose ones, and he had bits of cardboard shoved in underneath them to hold them in place. A real bodge, but it worked. I always remember that, the bits of cardboard. But yeah, those extenders were pretty much essential. So now we've had a look around the ST. So that there's not much more to say about that really. As I say, the STfm was replaced with the STe, which had the better sound chip, but not just the better sound chip, but also had improved graphical capabilities. So the original STs had 512 colours, 16 on screen. The STe had 4096 colours, but still restricted to 16 on screen, which was a bit mad. There were tricks you could use to get around it, but they were quite memory intensive, or CPU intensive, should I say. And the STe had a new version of TOS, which it also meant that some games weren't compatible. Not many. One of the most famous ones was Kickoff. There was a big furore over that at the time, that Kickoff would not work on STEs. That's the one I always remember people going on about. And I had a couple of friends who had STEs, but they used to find the odd game that wouldn't work, but it wasn't too bad. So the STE stood for enhanced. So that was pretty much the main differences between the STfm and the STe. And then obviously we had different configurations. So this is a 520. You also had the 1040 models, which had 1 megabyte of RAM. This is 512, and you could upgrade them up to 4 megabytes. It's quite difficult to do on the STfms because you had to solder the RAM in, whereas on the STEs they had SIM card slots, as they called them, SIM slots, where you could just plonk your memory in, more like a modern PC. Much easier to upgrade. I never upgraded my ST as much as I wanted to. Main reason being is that I didn't have the skills to be able to solder memory in, and I didn't know anyone who could do it for me at the time. So I always missed out, especially when later on in the ST's life they started releasing more games that used 1 megabyte, and I couldn't play those, unfortunately. But then again, a lot of those later games that used 1 mega or needed 1 megabyte, some of those were STE only as well, because they needed the extra abilities of the STE. Oh, that was the other thing of the STE. STE also had hardware scrolling, whereas this didn't. And the STE came with a blitter as standard, whereas the STfms you could fit a blitter. Some of the early models don't. It was more complicated, but some of the late models of the STfm actually had a socket for a blitter, where you could actually just buy it and stick it in. But that made a difference on the STE as well, having the blitter chip in there. So brought it a lot closer to the Amiga. The STE was a lot closer. Still slightly less powerful, but much closer to the Amiga. But I don't want to talk too much about the Amiga, to be honest, because this is an ST video. So games, obviously, I've got a couple here. I had more boxed games, but unfortunately they got water damaged in my garage, which is really annoying, and these are a couple of the only ones that survived because they were in a different box. But it's alright, because generally these are the two styles of boxes that you've got with the STs. You've got different variations of cardboard boxes, like you can see here for Pipe Mania, or you've got your plastic boxes that are more like the old tape cases that you used to get. So there's one for time scanner, your plastic box. But there was various sizes and differences in between. As I say, I'll show you actually, because I grabbed one of the two big boxes of discs I've got. But I've got two that are completely full like this. As you can see, absolutely hundreds and hundreds of discs. And there goes, there's a nice pirated version of Narco Police. I used to cut the screenshots out of the magazines and stick them on. That's one of my original discs there, but I've got plenty of originals in here as well. There you go, there's Creepy by Atlantis. Very, very cool game, exclusive to the ST. Actually featured it in my ST exclusives video, which I'll link in the comments. And it's a bit like the Spectrum Classic Attic Attack. Very good. So there we go. All sorts of stuff there in the discs. There's one of the best games ever made on the ST, Gauntlet 2. So there we go. Very, very good. I did find when I hooked up my ST not so long back that a great deal of those discs no longer worked, of course. So I reckon only about a third of them actually worked, because those old discs do deteriorate over time, unfortunately. But there are plenty of modern solutions for the ST, most notably Gotek drives that are basically virtual disk drives. And some people fit them externally, or some people take out the original disk drives, especially if they were non-working, and put the Gotek in there instead, which is a good way of doing it. My brother has an STe, a 1040 STe, that has a Gotek installed instead of the disk drive, which is really cool. Works very, very well. So final conclusions then, really. Obviously, I'm a big ST fan because it was a big part of my youth. The fact that it's one of the few systems that I still have, you know, from then. I still have my original Lynx. I still have my original 2600, as I say, and this is my original ST. They're the only three that I still have. You know, so I've got a massive amount of fondness for the ST. It was a great computer. Did me really, really well. It was a great computer, a great price, and a lot of people say, what's the point in owning one in the present day, because the Amiga's like kind of the same but does everything better and it's more powerful. And I can understand that point of view in many ways, because there is a lot of crossover with the games, obviously. There is some stuff that's exclusive to the ST. As I mentioned, I did a video on ST exclusives, looking at 10. I do plan to do a follow-up video to that at some point, because that was really popular. And I've got more games that I could show you. And also, when I did that video, lots of people in the comments going, "Oh, there's this game, like they do." So we'll make a follow-up at some point, but probably nothing that really, really major. I think probably the best example to give in terms of ST exclusives is 05, which needs an STe, but 05 is a truly amazing game. So good. I'd say that's the best ST exclusive, to be honest. But really, the ST is worth owning because it's just such a big part of computing and video gaming history. It was an extremely important computer, especially to the music industry, but also to other industries. I mean, it was one of the first affordable computers you could do desktop publishing on. It was a lot cheaper than a Mac, but could do everything the Mac could do and more. In fact, you could buy a card, basically you could fit in your ST, that made it Mac compatible. Same, you can make it PC compatible as well, with early PC stuff. And in many cases, the ST would run the software faster than the early PCs did. So that was a pretty cool thing as well. So the ST was an amazing computer for the time. Although it lacked, you know, the graphic and sound oomph of the Amiga, I would argue that the ST was a much more versatile computer that could do a lot of more different things. The Amiga was very much designed as a games machine, but Jack Tramiel and his team at Atari designed the ST as a serious computer, and a computer that could do everything. And really, the ST could do everything. It could play games well. It could do desktop publishing. It had the MIDI ports, of course, and music. I mean, that was just... I can't understate the importance of the MIDI ports, because, you know, if you watched an episode of Top of the Pops back in the late 80s and early 90s, there would be an Atari ST on stage almost the whole time. You know, it was such a big thing. And yeah, I mean, it was educational. You know, it did everything. And a truly great computer, in my opinion. And I was pleased when I did my greatest computers of all time video recently that the ST ranked really highly in that list. So I'm not alone in my opinion of the ST. Although perhaps if you look online, you'd think otherwise, because you always get so many haters on the ST. And it's funny that whenever I do a video on the ST, you always get loads of people going on about in the comments about how it's not as good as the Amiga, which I always think is so sad, because it's not recognised in the ST for what the ST is. Forget about the Amiga, we're talking about what the ST is itself. But there we go, that's it. I hope you enjoyed my review and overview of the Atari 520 STfm. I've been the Lad, I thank you for watching, and I'll see you all again for another video very soon. Bye-bye.
The humanoid must not escape. The humanoid must not escape.